Welcome again to Leadership Development News, Profiles and Practices of Top Performers. I'm Dr. Riley Nadler. Dr. Kathy Greenberg and I have been doing this now for over 20 years. And what we love to do is interview people who will give you some tips, tools to be in the top 10%. What is that? So the top 10% is a tipping point. If you or the team that you lead can get in that, and often it's small actions. We like to say micro initiatives can have a macro impact. So we always want to bring tools from thought leaders that can help you move forward. And today we're going to talk about unleash leadership, how to solve the 7 issues holding you back from your greatest impact. So we got two folks, Dr. Garland Vance and his wife, Dorothy Wood Vance. And so we have some questions and we're going to go through their bio. We're excited. Why do Kathy and I do this? Because we are ongoing learners. I'm a hungry, thirsty learner. And so for me to be able to get some of the tips from them, I just came from supervising people who want to be a coach. And so, I have this venue where anybody I work with, I can share some of the things that we're going to hear today, both from Garland and Dorothy. So why do we like emotional intelligence? All the research is showing that top leaders have emotional intelligence. And so the big question is, how? And so some of the key things as leaders, and we'll tap on this, that these 4 key leadership challenges that I see, and I'm sure the advances see. One, we're under more emotional distress than ever before. More anxiety, more loneliness, more anger, more divisiveness. Whatever the adjective is, put more in front of it. And that's kind of what we're experiencing. So that's where we are today. And then you talk about who we are as individuals. And as individuals, we don't have the self-awareness that we think we do. Some of the research is saying, oh, we all think we're self-aware. And as much as, 75% of the time, in some of the research, it shows it's only about 15% of us are self-aware. Dr. Kathy Greenberg, who you now see on the screen, and advances, we are working with people to help raise their self-awareness. So that's the second item, is lack of self-awareness. The third item of the challenge that we're asked advances is we're on autopilot as much as 95% of the time. So everything's going on. We're not that self-aware and we're on autopilot. And so we get stuck in these situations. And what we're going to focus on with advances is what leadership is. What is that? Slow thinking. Daniel Kahneman wrote the book, Thinking Fast or Slow. How often are we in slow thinking? 2% of the time. So hopefully as a listener, you're going to be listening, you're going to be slow thinking. And we just know that these core skills, even with AI in 2030, are still going to be important. Interpersonal relations, knowing yourself, being a leader. Kat, welcome to the show.
Hey there, always good to be here, and I'm glad we have such amazing guests today. We're going to be talking about unleashed leadership. I love the intro there. One of the things that many of us are still dealing with, and for whatever reason, we see the highlights of our conquering or having to conquer worry and anxiety. And I think some of the things that we're going to talk about today are going to help us to refocus so that we can mitigate some of that worry and anxiety because we are in a global energy crisis. And for those of you who don't know that, the research is clear from 6seconds.com. Over 622,000 people in 169 countries participated in this most recent research from Joel Friedman and Patty Friedman. And it's really important for us to remember leadership isn't what it used to be. Teamwork is not what it used to be. We are in a totally different environment than we have ever been in our entire careers, in our entire lives. And I hope today we're going to learn a lot more about the issues that are holding every one of us back with Dr. Garland Vance and Dr. Dorothy Wood Vance.
All right, so Kat, I'll introduce Garland. If you want to introduce Dorothy, we'll keep our genders focused. All right, so who is Dr. Garland Vance? Well, he believes that every person deserves to work with a great leader. And we hope you as a listener, that's you. And every leader can be great. He spent 25 years helping organizations develop leaders to succeed. He's authored Getting Unbusy, which Forbes named one of the 7 books everyone on your team should read in 2020. And it was a best business book. And we're going to hear more from him.
Super. Well, Dorothy Wood Vance has been helping leaders discover and maximize their unique talents and gifts for over 25 years, empowering good leaders to become great. With her husband, Garland, she co-founded Advanced Leadership, which is recognized as one of the top 20 leadership companies in America. She and Garland live with their 3 children in Knoxville, Tennessee. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah,
We're glad to be here.
Super excited to be with you all today.
I love the name of your company. Kathy and I are always kind of, we love words and playing with words and acronyms. So Advance.
You're right.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Hey, you're picking up faster than a lot of people pick up that we put our last name in our business.
It takes some people years to realize, oh, wait, that's your name.
That's right. Well, so we usually start, and you both will kind of share back and forth. For Advance, who or what's been some of your key influences? Like what's kind of brought you to some of the pearls of wisdom we're going to hear from you?
Yeah, I think for me, and I know we'll talk about this later, but we believe that every leader is either going to be a hero or a villain to the people who they lead, and I think both of us can look back and point to some heroic leaders and some villainous leaders who have influenced us. I know for me, one of the influences that brought me here was my father was an associate pastor of a church. And I won't give you all the details because that'll come out in a later book one day. But he was the associate pastor of a church, and a new senior pastor came in and really did some significant damage to the people, to the structure of the organization.
Yeah.
And my dad ended up getting fired from that, and the pastor ended up getting fired. And I got to watch that whole thing. And I was 14 years old. And that was the moment as a 14-year-old that it dawned on me that one leader can truly make the difference between people experiencing growth and flourishing or people wilting.
Yeah, for me, I was fortunate enough to grow up in an environment and be raised by parents who didn't really see a difference between a woman leading and a man leading. I had a dad who was very supportive of women in leadership. I had a mother who modeled for me women in leadership. I had other influences in my life growing up. And so I was raised seeing how absolutely essential it is to have gender representation on every leadership team and how important my voice is in leadership.
Oh, that's beautiful. I can't help but say this, and I obviously we have a serious conversation here, but one of the things I always say in my speaking about heroes and villains is I use the picture of Mr. Gru. I don't know if you're Minions fans with kids, but
Yes,
I
yes.
love that entire series. And so I always think of Mr. Gru, he started out as this villainous character, right? Always, wanting to have things his way. And then he had these beautiful children that he adopted, which softened him. And then he becomes the hero. And it's funny, some of us have to realize through this self-awareness that we have to do some things differently in order to be the best version of us to help others. So that's
Yeah.
beautiful. I loved it.
That's so true. And we are going to completely steal that illustration, and we'll give you credit the first 3 times that we use it.
No worries, no worries. Anybody who listens to this will know where it came from. You.
They'll know who it is.
That's right.
So let's start off in the book, and then when was that book published?
So we just published that in October of 2025.
Okay. So in the book, you talk about every problem in business starts with a leadership problem. That's a hard pill to follow. Kathy and I know that because we're working with leaders. And what do you mean by that? Because often I would say to folks, most of them underestimate their influence. And Garland, your story kind of exaggerates or promotes the influence, but I think most leaders underestimate. So when you talk about that, say a little bit more about it starts with the leader.
Yeah, so the hard realization is that every problem starts with the decisions that a leader makes or doesn't make, the actions that a leader takes or doesn't take, the strategies that they follow or they don't follow. And so we never want it to be blaming them, but we do want every leader to accept the responsibility that the problems start with them. And so we've got to look in the mirror first as leaders before we point the finger at other folks. And you can see this over and over. You can look at the collapse of Blockbuster, and you can see the decisions that leaders made or failed to make and how those caused collapses. But at the end of the day, every problem in business begins with the leaders.
When you talk about the concept that you just shared with us, and I don't know if Dorothy was going to say something, but I'll make space here so that you can, Dorothy. I'm curious, when you talk to leaders, if they're really aware of what's going on, or have you been asked by others to kind of come in the company? I'm curious, what's your entry point, and who is the person that contacts you to kind of get the ball rolling?
It varies.
Yeah.
Yeah. Usually, where we've had the most success is where we can have direct contact to the person who's making the decisions. But usually, it enters on an HR level. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah. Yeah, typically HR level. And I think one of the things that's interesting with that is that most people that we've talked to would agree with that statement about the person leading them. They would
Yeah.
say, if they are the head of HR and they report to the CEO, they would be like, yeah, absolutely. It's every problem in the business starts with the decisions and the actions that the CEO is making. So we'll agree with that. They'll often agree with that decision or that statement about the person leading them. But when we have to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, oh, in the words of the great philosopher Taylor Swift, it's me, hi. I'm the problem, it's me. When we have to do that, it becomes a little bit harder.
Yeah, we've noticed what we've called the finger pointing phenomenon. Whenever we start working with a
Right.
company, we have to get over that first. Usually we come in and everything we're saying is resonating, and people are like, oh my gosh, I totally get what you're saying because that sounds just like my supervisor. And we have to get past all of that of pointing the fingers, and finally realize, wait a minute,
Yeah.
I'm involved in this too. I also am a leader who is leading, and I also have been a part of decisions. And then once we get there, we can get to the point where we're like, and I also can make changes. And that's when people start feeling good, when they realize, okay, yeah, I've been a part of the problems, but that means that I can also be a part of the solutions.
Right.
Beautiful.
I know when and Kat and I, whether we're doing it together or individually, talking about the best boss, putting a list on the flip chart, best boss, what do they do? What do they say? What do they do? What they say, they would do. What was the impact on you? And it backs them into exactly like you're saying. We'll get to when you say a leashed leader or unleashed, but it backs them into that's what your best boss does. Are you doing some of those things? And now once it's there in kind of black and white, and it backs them into it. But you have an interesting thing in your title, about the unleashed leader. So what is a leashed? Leashed.
Hard to say, isn't
Leash leader. Say
Is
that three
leashed
Say
times.
that
leader,
10
yeah.
times, yeah.
A leader notices they're leashed when they realize that there's a discrepancy between their level of responsibility and their level of ability. Now, sometimes that can begin with, wait a minute, I have way more ability than I've been giving responsibility, especially like early in one's career, if they're just a go-getter, but yet they have to start out at that entry-level position. But eventually, if you stay in leadership long enough, everybody feels the tension that other way, where you get promoted to a point where your responsibilities exceed your abilities. And that's when you start feeling the real tug of that leash of, I don't know what to do. This is a real tension. I
Hmm.
I don't know how to solve these problems, how to move on with my own growth and development. And then you start getting that 3 steps forward, 6 steps back type of sensation that feels like you're being tugged on a leash. That's
Hmm.
when you know you're a leashed leader.
A beautiful visual there. I like the way that you laid that out for our listeners. I like the concept when your responsibility exceeds your
Yes.
ability.
Yes.
And that is so huge because many of us, and I'll use some of your terms here, there is this movement from guilt to growth.
Mm,
And I think that's something that many people don't recognize, or if
yeah.
they do, they don't know what to do about it. So let's get into maybe a couple of maybe stories about how you've walked into an organization and found some of these leashed leaders and how you got them to recognize that the responsibility that they have currently is much different than when they came in the company, and their capacity is not keeping up with their ability, meaning they have
Mm.
they have this room for growth. They just haven't taken the opportunity maybe to do the work. And now maybe it's the time for you to recognize, hey, this is an opportunity. It's not a limiting factor. Maybe speak to
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So many
So many
stories.
stories. Yeah, I think one that really stands out to me is we were working with some leaders recently, and we asked the question, just close your eyes, raise your hand. How many of you don't feel like you're great at your job as a leader? And every room in the hand went up.
Every
And
hand in the room.
sorry, yeah, every hand in the room, every hand in the room went up while they had their eyes closed. And we said, okay, and how many of you hope that nobody else recognizes it? And
Yeah.
every hand stayed up. And then we just said, hey, we just want to give you the hard data. Everybody thought that, and everybody is hoping that nobody else figures it out. That means you're leashed. And then once they know that, then we can dig into the questions of, now what's holding you back, and that's where those
Right.
7 issues come that I think we'll talk about later.
And
Well,
that's
beautiful.
great.
Yeah.
We'll
We're
get
gonna
to that in just a second. Um,
you take us
and
to break, Ralph.
yeah, I just wanted to say a comment, then we'll go to a break.
Okay.
Goes back to initially you were saying people are not that self-aware, but all their hands were up, and it's good that you did it with them without seeing it, that they could say that. Just the play on words, we talked about advance, and I love the responsibility. This goes back to Fritz Perls and the Gestalt world of ability to respond. What's responsibility is ability to respond. And I imagine what you're going to be saying is when we think about ability to respond, I got to respond. And I imagine a lot of that is what can other people do? It's not all you to respond. And it's not only your ability to respond. How do we get other people and their ability to respond? So I just wanted to add on to that play on words. So we're going to
Excellent.
take our first break, and you're listening to Leadership Development News, and we're going to hear more about the 7 issues holding you back for great impact. So come right back.
Welcome back. You're listening to Leadership Development News. Today, we're talking about how you can overcome being a leashed leader, and try that 10 times real fast. We're talking to great guests today, authors of Unleashed Leadership: How to Solve 7 Issues Holding You Back, by Garland and Dorothy Vance at Advance Leadership. When we left, we were talking about some samples, examples of things that you've seen when you've come into an organization and you see the leased leadership and you're trying to help release them and get them to grow instead of feeling guilty. Let's spend some time here talking about how to resolve some of these issues with the 7 things holding us back. So you claim that at least 95% of company problems come from just 7 leadership issues. Tell us what those issues are and how did you uncover them, and maybe give us some beautiful examples in the process.
Sure. So I told you earlier that my father was a pastor, so all 7 of these issues are going to start with C. So, because pastors love alliteration. So let me give you the 7, and then I'd love to share a story about a group that had misdiagnosed one, and once they realized they had a different issue. So the first issue is character. And there's moral character, like do the right thing and don't lie, steal, or cheat. But there's more than that. There's leadership character, where leaders need to take responsibility for the outcomes of their teams. They need to act with humility, and they need to hold people and themselves to a higher standard, and including doing hard things. So that's leadership issue number 1, is character. Issue number 2 is competence. And competence is when a leader has not upgraded their skills for what the team or the organization currently needs. So it could be a new role or a new goal, and they're stuck doing what they've been doing well for years, but the organization or the team doesn't need them to do that. So they have a competence issue where they have new skills they need to develop. The third issue is capacity, and capacity is all about the time, energy, and attention that a leader has, because leadership takes time, energy, and attention. And so if they don't rework their energy and rework their schedule and refocus their attention, then they end up not giving their team what they need. The fourth issue that we see is clarity. So clarity is all about the vision of that group or organization. Does everybody on the team know where you're going, how you're getting there, what each person's role is in getting there, and why it's important to get there in the first place? Fifth issue is community, and community is all about the trust and the collaboration that a leader creates. Does the team trust that leader, and does the team trust each other? Does the team collaborate with each other? Is there a sense of physical and emotional safety that the leader provides for them? Just 2 more issues. The 6th issue is culture, and culture is where the values of the organization must line up with the behaviors that the leader expects. And so if we say we are customer service focused, or we put people first, does the way that we treat people, even when they ask for a refund, or even when they tell us they don't like our services anymore, does that line up with that value? And then the final issue is consistency. And consistency is all about the goals and the words and the emotions that the leader uses. Are those consistent day in and day out? Do they know, do people know what to expect from that leader? So those are the 7 issues. I do have a great story that I'd love to share with you, but let me pause there, because I just did a whole bunch of talking.
Yeah. So just for our audience, and both Kat and I, if you see us, we're writing this down because we love this stuff and we want to kind of use it. But so the 7 C's: character, competence, capacity, clarity, community, culture, consistency. I think all those are really good, and it's nice, easy to remember. So yeah, so maybe give us your example.
Yeah. So one of my favorite stories is we started working with an organization. It was about a $150 million company, and they called us up and they said, "Hey, listen, we're dealing with a culture issue. Like we know it, we're dealing with a culture issue." And they started explaining what they believed was a culture issue. And it was kind of surprising to both of us because we knew this organization and we knew about their culture, and they had a reputation for having one of the healthiest cultures in their industry. And so they thought it was that their behaviors, they were looking at their frontline leaders and they were just like, they're not living up to our standards. They're not living up to our standards. So we started doing some research in the organization and started talking to people, giving some assessments for them. And here's what we discovered. It wasn't that the leaders weren't aligning their behaviors with the values. It was that their leaders were so overwhelmed. They were so busy. They had so many priorities on their plate that they didn't have the ability to do it at the level of quality. In other words, they had a capacity issue, not a culture issue. And so we went back to the leaders of that organization and we were like, "Hey, this is actually really good news. We have a time, energy, and attention issue, not a lack of alignment around the values and the behaviors." And so we were able to go in and help them with their time management, their energy management, their attention management, their delegation, and the culture magically became fixed because they were dealing with that, not they were dealing with the capacity issue.
You can see why it's important to diagnose the right issue, and you probably all are already thinking of examples in your head of people that you've worked with and organizations that you've worked with that were just struggling, trying to fix their problems and totally focused on the wrong issue. So that's why we created this diagnostic tool. So the first thing people can do is figure out what exactly are we dealing with so they don't waste time trying to fix something that doesn't need fixing.
So,
I was just going to say something here that I think is really important for our audience to hear. And that is the diagnostic is also being done by an external,
Yes,
non-judgmental, independent, right, organization. And
yes.
I'd like you to talk a little bit more to that, because one of the things that Relly and I often see when we walk into any organization, and I mostly work with police and law enforcement or federal agencies, is an internal approach to these things, which always come with bias and history that create opinion. So something you just said is so important, having an assessment process, but also doing it independently. Let's talk to that for a minute.
Yeah. You've got the amen choir over here. And it is so difficult for people to learn that because we think we know ourselves and we think we know our company and the people around us, and we think we know how we're working together. But there are just things from the inside that we cannot see as effectively as people coming in from the outside having, as you said, no pre-bias.
Yeah.
And we're amazed at how that takes convincing, because, of course, to us, it's so clear. But it really does take convincing with people to let them know, a lot of what you believe, a lot of what your brain is telling you, what you've deduced, what your perceptions are not the whole story.
Right.
And we're seeing things from our perspective that you just can't see from your perspective.
Yeah.
And there's so much value in that.
And that goes back to what we talked about, the 4 challenges about self-awareness. Everybody thinks we're a great cook, we're a great driver, whatever it is, we all think we're better than we are. Our friend Marshall Goldsmith, said something like 70% of people think they're in the top 10%, so it's the lack of self-awareness. But the other piece that you're alluding to is the capacity. and that we're on autopilot. And so having other eyes, like you said, with your assessment to bring that in. And then I would think for majority of issues today that we see, it is the capacity, not that they don't want to do that, but it goes to your question about villain or hero.
Mm-hmm.
And do they decide that, or is that kind of an autopilot deal?
Yeah.
Yeah, how we are evaluating other people, if we're being treated as a hero, if people see us as a hero or a villain, it's this intuitive thing that we don't take time, as you're saying, to sit back and actually evaluate and think about how are others seeing us. And a lot of that lack of capacity to take the time to think through how we're being perceived has a lot to do with not having that outside perspective of people coming in and saying, are you aware of what it's like to be on the other side of you? And people aren't, as a result, taking the time on their own growth and development. So the first step in influencing whether or not you're perceived as a hero or as a villain is recognizing that tension of the leash, that somewhere along the line, my responsibilities are not in the same line of my abilities. And then taking the time to step back and think about what sort of development do I need to at least put myself out there as a heroic leader. Now, we don't have the power to control how other people see us or what other people decide about us, but we at least can control the data that we're giving them. Am I treating people with honor, dignity, and respect to the best of my ability? Am I taking the time to focus on my own growth so that everyone around me reaps the benefit of that? Is it important to me to spend time on my own leadership development so that it will affect, in a beneficial way, all the people that I'm leading and model for them the need for them to develop their own leadership?
That is so absolutely brilliant. And I think one of the things that I'm going to do, I'm going to pay you back here, Garland, is I'm going to reference the 7 C's in my new book called Global Leadership Future Proof, which is actually a 20th anniversary edition of a book I did with Marshall called Global Leadership Next Generation. I think one of the things that you're pointing to in this 7 C's assessment is so easy for people to digest. And I'm going to give those 7 C's again: character, competence, capacity. Then there's that beautiful clarity, community, culture, and consistency. And I think the fact that we can point people, to your organization to find that assessment is going to be a huge relief. I don't think there are enough people in the world who can do internal work. And I'm saying this with all honesty, and I love all the HR professionals out there. And I'll tell you, one of the things that really concerns me, and hopefully our listeners will agree. Unfortunately, if you're in the HR department, you may not. I was in a company last year, a very big global company, and the head of marketing, global marketing, brought me in because she knew that the 100 people that reported to her wanted to surface some issues. And they wanted to do an emotional intelligence assessment using what Relly and I love, which is the EQI 2.0. And oddly enough, she was all ready to get started. And when she came back to me, she said the HR department shut her down because they had their own tools that they wanted to use.
We've heard that story.
Yeah, that might issue some wounds from us. Right? You may see us bleeding a little bit.
And look, I'm saying this with all transparency because we're touching on an issue that's very important for people to hear. You cannot unleash anyone inside an organization until you have an external view of what's going on. And often, as much as I love our wonderful, highly, highly valued and highly capable HR people, they are not the means and the end all to the problems within an organization
Yeah.
because they're in the culture.
Yeah.
They're seeing the same limitations that other people are seeing. And one of the things that I thought was really helpful is this person came back to me and they said, well, maybe we can do an EQI accreditation so that our HR department has that capacity. I said, hey, I'm all in, let's do it. And again, it was shut down. So one of the things I'm trying to get across to everybody who's listening today is when you see these books, not only do you want to buy them and bring them into your company, maybe drop them on the desk of the HR leadership team, but also recommend that they need to use this clarity thing, right? The clarity thing, I think that was number 4.
Yeah.
To recognize that clarity has to come from seeing things from outside the organization. And just getting a check-in with somebody doesn't really cost you a lot of money, but it sure will save you a whole lot of time.
That's true.
Yeah.
Well
You know, the best HR departments that we have seen, they act as a resource connection more than anything. And I think, any leader, no matter what department they're in, we all get into the false mindset of every responsibility I'm given, I have to do it myself. When that's not true. Every responsibility you're given, you just have a responsibility to see that it gets done. And where that happens in HR, these HR professionals think, oh goodness, I need to know all of this. I need to know everything that the HR department requires of me, including leadership development. And a lot of people in HR are not trained in how to develop leaders. So the best HR professionals that we have seen recognize that their number one priority is to connect with the right resources and get the right people on board. It doesn't have to be them who's doing it.
All right. Absolutely. Absolutely beautiful.
So we're going to take our last break here. You're listening to Leadership Development News, and we're interviewing the Vance's Unleashed Leadership. We're going through how to solve 7 issues holding back your greatest impact. I'm sure you can get the book at all the stores, Amazon and Barnes and Noble and the other place. And we're going to come back and we're going to get more into what happens when people realize I'm the problem. We'll get their take on that.
Welcome back to Leadership Development News. We're having a delightful and very insightful conversation today with Garland and Dorothy Vance. And to reach out to them and get more information, use Garland at advancedleadership.live. Let me give you that again. That's Garland at advancedleadership.live. And we have been enjoying this conversation, talking a little bit about not only the 7 C's of unleashing leadership and how to solve those 7 issues holding you back. Let's talk a little bit about when people discover that they're the root of some of the problems that are going on in this organization. How do you handle that one?
Yeah. It's funny. The first emotion we see when people discover, oh, wow, I'm the problem, is actually relief. Because whenever somebody realizes I've been a part of the problem, then they can realize, well, that means I have power, I have control in this situation. I can also be a part of the solution. So, more than anything, whenever we can get people to that point of realizing I've been leashed and I've had a hand in that, and then that's when the optimism comes in.
Yeah.
Of, okay, I can get out of this. I can move forward. I don't have to be stuck anymore.
So one of the things that you have in your book, and we're trying to highlight some of this, and then also whether Garland, you or Dorothy want to talk about how our audience can get a hold of the book. But you talk about a 3-stage process, and we love the alliteration. So we got the 7
Of
C's, and
course.
More
now
alliteration to come.
now we got the 3 Ds:
That's
decide,
right.
discern, deliver. So walk us through those stages, and which stage do leaders most underestimate? And maybe, what's your thought why they decide, discern, deliver?
Yeah, I love that you all put such emphasis on the lack of thinking that people do these days. And our 3-stage process really grasps onto that
Mhm.
of reminding people, before you take any action at all, there's a lot of thinking that has to happen. So let's just pause, hold
Right.
back. And that's why the first stage is decide. Before you can do anything, you've got to commit to it. And you have to make the decision of whether or not that's going to be worth it to make that level of commitment. A lot of people skip that step whenever they want to take action on anything. And then they realize down the road, wait a minute, I didn't even decide if I wanted to do this. I didn't even decide if this was important enough. I just went.
Right.
I just started running.
Mm.
So we encourage people to first use that thought process to decide if this is worth it, if it's important enough, if you're going to commit to it. Second stage is discern, more thinking. This is where you step back and you evaluate what the problems are pointing to so you can figure out which one of these issues am I actually dealing with? Is my organization actually dealing with? And then what is the strategy that needs to be implemented in order to focus on this issue? And then finally, you can get to the deliver stage where you take action. And we kind of go back and forth
Yeah.
on whether or not which one of these is the one that people downplay and don't see as most important. But I think what we agree on, you tend to think.
I tend to think that it's the discern stage. So I tend to think that leaders, similar to the story I told earlier, I tend to think that leaders see presenting problems, surface level issues, and they try to fix those surface level issues
Right.
rather than digging deeper into,
Yeah.
is this character, is it competence, capacity? Which of these is it actually? And so they end up creating the right solution to a completely different problem.
Yep.
And I tend to see people skipping more the decide step of, do I really think this is important?
Yeah.
Do I really want to do what it takes and commit to this? But I think what we're both agreeing on here is that people are jumping into action way too soon. They want to deliver before
Yep.
they've even decided, is this important? How am I going to do this?
And that's where, I always said in the beginning, or I didn't actually say this, but I say it now all the time. If you stay in autopilot, you stay average. Kind of have the
Mhm.
trademark for that. If you stay on autopilot, you stay average.
That's
You
great.
only need to do a few things differently to be exceptional, but we're all on autopilot. And exactly like you're saying, and you decide, discern, you quickly go to deliver, and it's like, have we really thought about it? It doesn't have to be hours. It could be 5 minutes.
Exactly.
And to truly decide, is this what I want? Is this for my highest value for the organization? Discern, which then brings in other people. What do you think? Have I missed anything? You could do your scenario playing in discerning, and then decide. Maybe that's 5 minutes, maybe it's a half hour, but so many meetings, like, just go right to the first thing that comes out. And then you get groupthink. And if it's the leader or the head of the organization says, yeah, I think we should do this, who really is going to poke holes in it? I had this leader
That's so
who
true.
was really good at emotional intelligence. He was on the executive team. He was the only one on the team who did it in a great way that he would say, you don't mind if I poke a couple holes in that, do you?
Mm.
Who's going to disagree with that?
Yeah.
And that's what the decide and discern is. You want to take time to poke a couple holes.
Yes.
One of the things that I just want to bring to our audience attention is that these great guests today are giving you all a beautiful gift of an audiobook version of this amazing book. If you go to www.advancedleadership.live/free book, you're going to get an audio version of this as their gift to you. And what a beautiful gift for the spring and everything that we have to look forward to in new beginnings. And our production engineer, our amazing friend and colleague, Matthew, is going to post that link on YouTube. So if you're listening, you want to grab this gift. It's an audiobook, and it can be yours at www.advancedleadership.live/free book. Thanks for that, both Garland and Dorothy. What a precious gift to all of us.
Oh,
You're welcome.
Yeah.
And we intentionally made the book pretty short because we know that people don't have a lot of time these days. So it's something that you could probably listen to on a flight. And the audiobook actually has even more insight from us than the written book. The printed copy of the book. There's more stories. There's more thoughts that we had about some of the concepts. And we just had a really fun time recording it.
Yeah.
Well, you got really great stuff, and we enjoy it, and that's why Kathy and I do this, because I said, Kat, before you got on, thirsty learners. And so then we also have venues that we can pass on best practices. And I think what you have is some really good best practices. One of the things that you teach leaders, and we talk about best practices, is to focus on critical actions instead of endless to-dos. They all have endless to-dos. And so what's the danger of over planning when trying to grow, versus doing what's critical? So maybe give us your take on that.
Yeah, so we have a statement that we say all the time. It's simplify to multiply. I doubt that we created that. We probably stole that from somebody else somewhere, but simplify to multiply. But so often when leaders want to grow themselves, when they decide that they want to unleash an area of their lives, they start identifying 20 or 30 different actions that they need to do. And within 2 or 3 days, they're so overwhelmed by the changes they're imposing on themselves that it just ends up dying. It's kind of like a New Year's resolution. It just has a very small lifespan if you try to add too much change at once. And so we try to get leaders to think in terms of three critical actions. So let me give you an example. Let's say that a leader identifies that they're really struggling with clarity, that they haven't identified where we're going and how we're getting there and who's doing, what each person's responsibility is to get there. So a critical action for them might be to spend 3 minutes a day writing or reviewing the most important goal. Spend 3 minutes. A second critical action might be to talk with one person per day about the most important goal. And then a third action might be start every meeting reminding everybody of what the most important goal is. It doesn't have to be huge,
Right.
but small critical actions that are thoughtful, that where you've really discerned them, end up multiplying the impact significantly more than 40 or 50 half-baked ideas.
It's a brilliant opportunity here for everybody to take a look at how they can do things with so much more ease. And for those of you out there who are the list makers and think that, more is better, let's really evaluate that right now. You know, one of the things that you also say in the book is that sometimes these 7 issues can cause the most damage at scale. Can you
Yeah.
just tell us kind of which one of these you think is the biggest culprit?
Yeah, so I actually just referenced it. When you're looking company wide, what we've found is a lack of clarity or challenges around clarity cause the most damage at scale. And we've seen this multiple times, but let me just tell you a quick story about how we saw this significantly. Several years ago, we were working with a startup, and they were trying to grow very aggressively. And every time we would see them, they would tell us that they were hiring new people and onboarding new people, and they needed more people, more people, more people, more people. And this was before we had really codified these 7 issues. But what they were telling us was they had what they were saying through their actions was that they had a capacity issue, that they needed more people, more time, more energy, more attention, all of those things. And then we did this little exercise with them. We said, we took the top 15 leaders and we said, take 1 minute, write down the single most important goal of the company, the one thing you must accomplish in the next year. 15 people in the room, and there were 14 completely different answers.
Wow.
And we realized you don't have a capacity problem, you have a clarity problem.
Yeah.
But that lack of clarity was creating all of these other problems in other dimensions as well.
That's a great example. One of the things early on that we heard in one of our shows was the co-author with Deepak Chopra, Rudy Tanzi. And when we get these gems, just like we're getting gems from you, and he said, what's stress? Unmet expectations. I shared that so many
Love that.
times, but it goes back to the clarity problem that you said. So clarity causes the most damage. I would agree. Which one is the most frequent of the C's? Maybe not
That's
only
a
the
fun
most
question.
damage. And I have a guess, but go ahead. What would you say is the most frequent of the 7 C's?
Yeah, at this day and age, I think capacity
Yes.
is the most frequent of
That's
those.
and Kat, you've seen this. Sometimes just getting a hold of someone to have a meeting with them where they can slow think is a challenge because they're just on overwhelm
Yeah.
as a consequence.
Yep.
So
Absolutely.
how do you get people to focus on the right things? Is it typically, are you doing individual coaching? Are you doing mostly teams or team coaching? How are you,
Yeah.
or both?
Yeah. So
We
most of what we do is teams.
Yes. We work mostly with teams and organizations at a high level, not as much with individuals.
Yeah.
But there is individual work that's being done.
Right. Yeah. They have to identify it at the team level and then do the work
Yeah.
at the individual level. But that's where if a team can agree on what their
Yeah.
most important priority is, then everybody else can start building their time and their energy and their attention around that goal. And then we're at least heading in the same direction.
Well, this has been an absolutely beautiful experience. I hope for our audience, it sure has been for me, and really it looks like it has been for you. We're coming to the close today. And again, thank you for that beautiful book. For those of you who are interested and you want more details, please go to Garland at advancedleadership.live. And thank you all for tuning in to tune up your performance with leadership development news. Any last words?
Ooh, that's a.
Good.
I would say this. I would close with these 3 words: Your leadership matters. Your leadership
Beautiful.
matters. People are going to talk about you at the dinner table. They're going to think about you when they wake up in the morning. They're going to think about you when they go home at work. And what you do really makes a difference.
You have more influence, as you all said, than you think you do.
So let's leave you with our one sentence completion for our lightning round. Leadership is.
Leadership is seeing a clear vision of the future, gathering others around that vision, and then mobilizing others to create that vision together.
Beautiful. All right. Well, thank you, folks. Garland, Dorothy Vance, you have their website that you can get your free book. Hopefully you do that. You've been listening to Leadership Development News, Profiles and Practice of Top Performers. We'll see and hear from you again next week.
Thanks so much. Great to be with you all.